almost like a relief of stress when you go back home and you're like, ugh, you know, I can
We
be
say it. I
myself.
felt my temper rising. I felt my irritation. And kind of like, no, I'm not going to play these games.
I want you to imagine something. So you walk into a room fully qualified, fully prepared, and yet somehow you are invisible. So your
Mm.
ideas are repeated, but they're not credited, and your expertise is questioned before it's heard. And then slowly, without even realizing it, you begin shrinking parts of yourself to make the room more comfortable. And that quiet shrinking has a name, and it's called self-erasure. So today we're going to talk about it and what it means to refuse it. So welcome, Shara, and thank you for joining this month's conversation. Again, the title is Leading Without Self-Erasure. It's about navigating leadership spaces without shrinking, softening, or disconnecting from who you are. And I'm honored to be joined by you, Shara. I feel you're a leader whose journey reflects both resilience and intentional authenticity. I've seen what you do, especially in the Launch with Power space and also within the community. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Tolu. It's quite an honor to be speaking with you about this topic.
So, Shara, I want to begin with something very, very foundational. When you hear the phrase leading without self-erasure, what does that mean to you personally?
I'll preempt this by saying that when you sort of shared a little bit about the topic that you're going to discuss, I struggle with it a lot because
Yeah.
I think, like many women of color, we face this every day. I would say earlier in my career, not so much now. Being self-employed and having our own company and business, it's a little bit different. But definitely in the formative years of education, schooling, first couple of jobs in the professional environment, this was definitely there. And yeah, it's a tough one to say in one word or one sentence. It is a feeling that has always been there, I would
Mm,
say. To me, it means not being myself naturally,
mm,
the way nature designed me to be, right? It means conformity. It means reshaping. It means
mm.
sometimes leaving things out. It means sometimes being what I am not. So
Oh,
yeah, so that's how I sort of define self-erasure. And I think for me as well as a Muslim woman,
mm,
there's a whole context of that. Just this morning I was reading, there's so many attacks happening around the world and so many Muslim countries under attack. And I
yeah.
had this sense of like, here I am sitting in Canada. I have a home. I have so many privileges. I have food. I have safety. I have comfort. I have all these things. And
Mm,
by extension, I'm feeling remorse and guilt that here I am safe and sound as a Muslim, and my
mm,
brothers and sisters around the world, from the African continent to the Middle East to America, are under attack. So
yeah.
now I have to sort of erase that, right? And I have to sort of get into a mindset of, okay, like that's not here. I can't allow my mental health to be affected. So self-erasure even goes deeply into those areas of, what defines you as a human.
Was there any defining moment, say, in your career where you decided you would no longer shrink to fit the room?
Yes. I'm glad you led with this question. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no
Mm,
doubt.
yeah.
I remember, years ago, and possibly I've shared this story with you before, but
Mm,
years ago, I was re-entering the job market after having had my second child. And
mm,
I applied to all the top engineering firms. So a little bit of background on me. So I was looking for a role in engineering consulting, working in engineering. I had a history of working in the nuclear sector previously, and being in Alberta, it's mostly oil and gas. So the consulting firms are in oil and gas. So, I
mm,
applied to the top firms. I got invited to a very prestigious, well-known global engineering firm, and I was interviewed by the director of one of the departments there. So, as a younger person, obviously I had the nerves going, but I prepared and I showed up, and
mm,
when I got there, the first question that he asked me was not really a question, it was more of a statement which set the tone
Yeah.
of the meeting. And that statement was, I wanted to see the person behind the resume.
Okay.
And that really threw me off. I didn't know how to take it, right? Because I could take
Hmm.
it in a positive way, like, oh,
Yeah.
he wanted to meet the person behind the resume. There's something on the resume that's impressed him or affected him, and he'd like to meet me. But the body language and everything kind of read the other way. so, so I interpreted it correctly because I was puzzled. But then as the interview unfolded, I realized that he was quite skeptical. Engineering, although we have many women now in the field, it
Hmm.
is still a male dominated environment. Although we do have now more and more women of color entering these domains, it's still quite Caucasian in this part of the
Hmm.
world. So I did start to feel quite on guard and reactive. And as the questions proceeded, I kind of got a little cocky. So the questions, were kind of like, give me an example of this and tell me a time when you did that and so and so. And by this time, I had worked, a good 10 years in
Yeah.
engineering. And I kind of felt like these were very basic questions. And I sort of chuckled to myself, which was an external chuckle. And I just looked him in the eye and I said, are you seriously going to ask me these basic questions? And I was like, I just shot myself in the foot, but I was okay with that. I was like, you know what? It's okay. I'm gonna
Mm.
take this risk. I'm gonna put my neck out there and be like, like I think we're past that. Like from my resume, you can tell I'm past that.
Mm.
And I think it shocked him a little, but then he reverted back with, can you give me an example of such and such? And I stubbornly gave him an example that was
Hmm.
around family life, around children. And I sort of said, well, this particular question, I'm going to respond by giving the example of my newborn and telling him that if I can handle a family and children and raising a child, birthing and raising a child, I can handle any clients. And he really did not like that I just dug deeper and
Yeah.
refused to give him the standard response of, the
Yeah.
behavioral psychological
Interview
analysis
question.
questions. um, so it really irked him. And it really irked me because I got flushed, I felt the
Yeah.
heat rising, I felt my temper rising, I felt my irritation, and kind of like, no, I'm not going to play these games. You know, ask me the questions that actually mean something. And I sort of, by my final response, I think I wrapped that interview up. And I think there was, an hour scheduled, 35 minutes into the discussion. I was like, I'm done, kind of thing. And I actually sort of wrapped up the conversation and departed.
Mm. You know what I like about what you said? I like the fact that you mentioned in this part of the world when you
Mhm.
talked about, in terms of there's not a lot of women within that field, right? And so when they see a woman that's very well accomplished, it seems like maybe there's something wrong or the resume was cooked up. I don't know why they would think that a resume can be cooked up to that level, but then they have that kind of, you know, urge to want to interview her, like maybe a surprise. I don't know what it is. But, just coming from West Africa and, having, traveled, growing up a lot, even to the Middle East and to Europe, it was very different, even for us, because we always saw women that were in very high levels of positions. It didn't seem like they had those type of obstacle. I'm sure they had some type of obstacle, but they didn't have that type of obstacle where even within an interview they're being judged in that sense. So I don't
I
know.
think, yeah, like when even today, so many years
Mm,
down the line, when I try to unpack it, there were a lot of things that when we talk about shrinking ourselves, right?
mm,
Or being inauthentic, diminishing ourselves, there were so many things that were wrong in that meeting, aside from the fact
mm,
that it was a well-known engineering firm, global engineering firm. Aside from that label, when I was there, first of all, I had this first statement made about
yeah.
wanting to meet the person behind the resume. But then you also have a visual, a visual feedback that's happening, which is
Yeah.
I recognize him to be a South Asian person of my background. So for me, now I'm seeing like you as a person who's at the head of the department, at the head of the division, are shrinking yourself and asking me these already shrunk down questions, expecting me to conform to your ideologies, which I know have been compromised, which I refuse to compromise. And so, when you start to break it down, there's so many layers, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
for me, walking into a room as a new mama again, right?
Yeah.
Returning to the career. You
Yeah.
have like that level of sort of re-entering the job market, trying to go
Mm-hmm.
through that whole process. Then I'm a female. Then I have, my hidden, let's say, identities, like I'm
Yeah.
Muslim, which I don't wear the hijab, so I'm not visibly so. But
Yeah.
I hold that hidden identity. Then I'm meeting a gentleman who's of South Asian background, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, I'm having like a race conversation in my head, right?
Oh my God, did you just say South Asian?
Yes,
Oh gosh,
yes. So
that's
I'm
even
having a
worse.
race conversation. Yeah. So I'm having this whole race conversation of like, you're a person of, my general ethnicity, and you're treating me like I'm not even of that ethnicity. And sort of, I don't know what to think of that. So I think, yes, that was definitely one of the formative turning points, pivotal, like where I just had enough. And I grew up
Mm-hmm.
in a home where we discussed a lot of history, global history, a lot of politics. So I would say that I came from a very politicized family. My father led that. And coming from that lens, I was outraged. I was
Yeah.
really outraged. And I was like, at the cost of my career. Yes, at the cost of my career, I refuse to put up with this, even at this level. I'm not being subjugated. Apparently, I'm not being called racial slurs. I'm not being diminished as a woman, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
I sensed all of that internally.
I
So
can
it
see
was,
that.
for me, it was a bold move to walk out of that room.
Yeah.
Um, uh, in a sense, a form of protest, but I felt good about it at the end. I was like, I don't want to work for the guy. Look, if that's
Yeah.
how he is. I wonder
Wow.
how he runs his whole division. I wonder
Mm-hmm.
what his whole department's role is in the company. So it's a bigger
Mm-hmm.
story, right? It's not just an incident.
Yeah. Yeah. What
Hmm.
initially drew you into your leadership path or industry? So when you first entered, all of the professional spaces, and I know you've mentioned, your background as your dad being a political person or your family, I guess. Did you feel pressure, spoken or unspoken, to adapt yourself in order to be taken seriously?
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know that there's many people of color that would say no to that
Mm,
question. I grew up in the West. I was born and raised in the West.
mm,
We got further west as I got older. So,
yeah.
starting from the UK, Europe, and then here. Um, you are continuously grappling between your identity and what your internal reality is versus what the
Hmm.
external is, and adjusting.
Mm,
Growing up, we had a term within within my nuclear family. We called ourselves, myself and my siblings, we called ourselves in betweenies,
in
right?
between.
In
What?
betweenies, because when you go out there, you're not the same as you are at home. There's
Ah,
this layer of adjustment and fitting in,
yes.
right? You're not really your authentic self. Like, I can't break out in that sort of Desi accent and speaking like that,
Yes, yes, yes.
out there because I'll be judged on that. But
Hmm.
then when I'm at home and internally, I'm a slightly different person.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like what projected me into this role of leadership,
Mm,
I think I never wanted to be a leader. I was a very shy person.
yeah.
I was very introverted. I never thought I would speak in front of people. I never thought I'd be, doing things like this with you, having, a discussion, a podcast, recorded thing. But I do believe that that consciousness around how international policies and economics shape
Mm,
politics and how politics and economics affect countries and nations and communities and people and individuals. right? I started to realize that if I have been given all of the capacities and capabilities that I have, then I should be doing something a little bit more than just for myself, right? So that internal discussion and conversation, I really always connect it back to a sort of a spirituality, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you have that connection with yourself and awareness with yourself, knowing yourself, it's a spiritual exercise. Recognizing how you fit in to your environment, it is a spiritual exercise, right? You are no longer imposing yourself, but you're looking at how am I a part of this greater story, this greater landscape? So when that starts to kind of ignite within you, I think that you can't help but be in a leadership role. But I think how you define leadership can be so vastly different, right? There's the
Yeah.
servant leadership, there's the quiet leadership where you're really not in front of anybody, but somehow from behind you're directing and leading. You
Yeah.
know, many of us have seen our grandparents. I would say that my icon, if somebody says, who would you like to meet in the world? I don't
Mm-hmm.
have anybody that I would say, oh, I want to meet this celebrity and this business leader and this person and that person. I don't have that. I have my grandmother.
Yeah.
That's my icon. That's my, in my life, the leader that I saw who led well. Um, she was not educated. She was not aware of much. She didn't lead a community per se, but she raised people. She raised people to have a conscience, to have values and integrity. So with that said, I would say so my beginnings would be sort of those seeds that were planted by people around me, family members, definitely. But then being out there traveling in the world, living and traveling in different places of the world, I saw myself as different.
Mm.
At times I saw myself as a person who didn't fit in at all. So
Oh yeah.
when you don't fit in, when you feel uncomfortable, and then realizing that actually not only do I not fit in, not only am I uncomfortable, not only do I not have the same education or degrees or status or finances, I feel uncomfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable with myself. So then that discovery, that acknowledgement, that
Mm-hmm.
realization, that struggle, and we talk about mental health in communities of color, especially Black communities, our youth, right? That's what is sort of stemming from addictions, whether it's addiction to a phone, whether it's addiction to a substance, whether it's addiction to work. These are all
Mm-hmm.
stemming from the internal struggles. So I started to realize that I'm really struggling here.
Yeah.
I'm really struggling. And if I'm struggling, how do I emerge out of this? I got to push myself into
Yeah.
an area of serious discomfort. Aside from the discomfort that's all around me, I need to get uncomfortable with myself and I need
Yeah.
to sit in that and I
Yeah.
need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And actually, I would say that my leadership is not an intentional leadership of I wanted to be a leader. It was more so I got to do something about this discomfort because it's intolerable.
Mm.
And by that process of self discovery, which is continuing on till this day, you end up developing those leadership skills.
Yeah.
You end up recognizing that in others and saying, oh, that piece of your journey resembles the piece that I might have gone through, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
I can assist here. So it's more of a helping process that kind of
Yeah.
engaged that
Yeah.
put me on this leadership path.
I see. I see. I love some things that you brought out here. You talked about being an in-betweener, and I like the fact that we kind of are from the same background where we traveled a lot, just growing up. So I could relate to a lot of the things that you were saying. One thing that kind of stood out to me, that in-betweener thing that you talked about, where sometimes your accents, for instance, would have to change.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're from Nigeria, so we are those people we call no accent. We don't have accent. Right. So that's what we call when you're, relating with other cultures and other people, you see them say something like, "Oh, I can't hear you," or "I don't understand
Yes.
your accent." And so because of that, you have to switch. It's like a code. You just code switch, come
Yes.
out of what you normally stand for, start talking. differently or start doing things
Mm-hmm.
differently because somehow you want to fit in, but you don't quite fit in. So it's almost like a relief of stress when you go back home. You're like, ugh, I'm back home. I
We
can be
say
myself again. So
we have a saying in Urdu, "Muh tera karna," which means that you have to make your mouth crooked.
yeah,
So, we have this saying that when you're speaking English all day long, your mouth is tired of being crooked and you
yeah.
just want to relax into that.
Mm,
And I definitely see, I see both sides of that. And I do
mm,
think, for those of us who do that, right? And it's not just our language, it could be our behavior, our mannerisms, the way that we conduct ourselves, right?
yeah,
I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. It's an adaptation. But then I also say that as global citizens, as people
yeah,
who have been around the world, and as people who are people lovers,
yeah.
and we, as part of the course of education, commerce, business, community work, we're needing to engage with people. So
Mm,
that adaptation, I would almost say that on one hand, yes, we could call it a shrinking of yourself, right? Or
yeah.
a masking of yourself. But on the other hand, it allows us to be in spaces and rooms that we wouldn't normally be able to. And it allows us to have the ability to put others at ease to work with us and
Mm,
deal with us as well.
true,
Right.
true.
So, it's a double edged sword. I think, this
Yeah,
whole conversation is a little bit like, you could slice and dice it both ways.
yeah.
But sometimes there are moments where it becomes deeply personal, or I would say it deeply affects experiences and
Mm,
life where it becomes significant enough that you need to reconsider how you're doing it.
oh, wow. Okay. No, I like that. And I like the fact that you had mentioned some things that maybe would happen to you even internally, like during those
Mm.
experiences, which were, you not quite fitting in, you seeing yourself as the in-betweener, you always having to, you know, I mean, we talked about the code switch as well. And but then I like the positive part you brought out of it, which is the fact that you're also trying to get people to understand where you're coming from, the cultures, and how you do things too. So it's also that positivity that you bring to the conversation. I mean, I guess that would be the a turning point. What changed for you when you chose to lead more authentically?
Hmm. A big area to go into. So, what changed for me?
Or I can ask it this way:
Mm,
was it a gradual process, or was there a clear moment? I know previously in our conversation you did mention where you said, even within our community, like the Black community, there's a lot of mental health needs as well, and the fact that you see a lot of people still going through the same stress of shrinking. So, what was your clear defining moment where you decided, I'm not shrinking anymore?
mm. I think, well, I mean, first of all, that incident where I kind of walked out of the interview was me sort of saying, I'm going to take a bold step.
Mm,
But there have been several times, over the course of my life so far where you sort of, once you take a step, it's almost like you can't go back anymore. And if you go back,
mm,
you have an internal, like I said, that discomfort, right? You have
mm,
a sensation internally. Your body feels it. You might
mm,
be able to rationalize and kind of block your body and, make sense of it mentally. But at some point, your body's reacting to that and saying, that's not right. That's not right. It's part of a lot of protests coming up in my life, political protests. And, I'd be, thousands of people marching in the streets and that kind of thing. And those conversations we would have at home recently, when we talk about recent global international affairs or politics, recently, the different various wars in 2026, you
mm,
know, we're just into 2026, 25, 2026, recent conflicts around the world, things that happened, just recently in Minnesota with ICE. All of
mm,
these are moments where like for me, I step into that leadership more. I'm like,
mm,
how is this happening in this day and age? How are these things continuing to happen in this day and age? Right.
yeah.
So it's kind of like an outrage that you feel within yourself. And for me, all of these things that are happening, and even when we talk about business, on a business level, like how you choose to conduct your business. Before my computer, kind of was acting up, and we sort of decided, okay, it's time to bite the bullet and invest in some better equipment and so on. Why did we choose to go this NAS route, right?
Yeah.
Like, why did we want to have a local data storage on site, although we are a
Yeah.
very tiny boutique firm?
Mm,
Potentially we're oversizing, you know. They were very ethical, political decisions made. And, although it's a personal decision within the business, this is an outwardly decision when we talk about leadership in commerce, leadership in economics, our ownership around data, divesting from organizations that we know are complicit in genocide and complicit in suppression and subjugation, despite all the beautiful branding and marketing and glossy words and DEI policies. Despite
mhm.
that, we know that it prevails. So these are all acts of leadership,
Yeah.
right? And I think, all those little things, all those little decisions along the way that you make in the right direction, which
Mm,
resonate better with you,
mhm.
are leadership decisions. And at some point, that internal leadership is now an outwardly action, right? People
Mhm.
are going to see that whether you want them to see it or not, in just the
Mhm.
way you carry yourself and walk your life.
I see. Mm. No, let's get practical a little bit because, around Canada, around our
Mm,
community, you find out that a lot of people might also be in that shrinking phase right now because we see immigrants every day come into the country and they tell them, no, you're not qualified. Meanwhile, for 20 years, they've been doing amazing stuff only for them to come in here and start all over again. So, were there specific boundaries, decisions, or habits that helped you stop erasing parts of yourself? I mean, feel free to list them. So, because it would be
mm.
nice to just have them listed and then exemplified so that it could be relatable also um, to
I
others.
think that's a beautiful, yeah, I think that's actually a very beautiful and thoughtful question.
Mm,
Um, I would say from my personal journey, right? That's
mm,
really what I can share. I can't speak about someone else's journey. For me, very early on, I was very crystal clear on formulating what is my purpose in life,
yeah.
right? And for everyone, that's going to be different. And for many people, they might not really even have an inkling yet, or
Mm,
it might not be crystallized. I spent a lot of time early on through my teens thinking about this, really pondering
mhm,
upon these questions. So I would say think about what is the purpose of your life. Think about what are the non negotiables in your life.
mm,
All said and done, no matter the hardships that you're going to face, which you will face,
yeah.
and I will face, we need to think about what is the end game. If our day is the last day today, or our day is going
Mhm,
to be the last day in another 50 years, what is that end game going to look like? And what is, people might say, what is your legacy? Or what is that piece that you want to leave behind? Or how do you want people to remember you? What is that end game for you? Right?
mhm,
Was it that you had a bucket list? Was it that you had career ambitions? Really think deeply about that and then sort of reverse engineer that because that is going to shape what are your values, what are your morals, what are the things that you're willing to do, what are the things that you are not willing to do.
mm,
Say you find yourself in the most amazing job opportunity. You're a new immigrant or you're new to the country, you have designations, you have degrees, you have everything, you have experience, you have recommendations, you have everything from a career standpoint. And you get the dream opportunity where they're going to pay you an unbelievable amount. Let's say $250,000, $400,000, $500,000 salary position, but you know that the work that you're going to do is unethical. You
huh,
know that the work you're going to do is it's kind of evil. Okay, it's in an industry that's really not really good industry. Okay, are you going to take that job? Are you not going to take that job? Are you going to continue to suffer and grind it out and knock on doors and drive taxis or be a Tim Hortons server or, have side hustles and just eke out a living. These are the kinds of things that you need to really think about when it comes to your day to day, right? So if you're thinking about the end game, what are all of these things that are actually truly important to you and what are you willing to compromise on? And now you just reverse engineer from there, right? Getting clarity, I think, is one of the most important things that a human being can do in their life.